Hi, this is Ken. Welcome to my video on the computer build. So far, the two other videos that I've done are the introduction into me and GCP, and the second video was all the components that I had purchased to build this computer. And now welcome to the build. So without further ado, I'm going to focus the camera down into the case and what's going on in there. Starting with the case, I'm going to install the power supply. Okay, this is the inside of the computer case. Remember, I bought this from Roseville, and I bought the power supply from Seasonic. So power supply will go right here, and then I have to install screws to install it into the case. So make sure we got the orientation correct. It's going to sit in here just like that, and all the power connectors will come in here. Remember, all the power connections came in this bag, and then there's power cord, and then we're going to have these screws that we're going to install the power supply inside the case. So the screws are going to go right in here, and I'll go ahead and put those on. Okay, I've pretty much already installed it except for the last screw, and the reason why I'm going to show you what I'm doing here is I had to lift up the power supply just a hair with the holes in the case. So basically, for a computer build, all you really need is a Phillips screwdriver. I'm using this particular one because it's magnetic. In case something were to fall, it would actually pick it up. But I'm installing now the last screw, and I'll make it snug, but I won't over tighten, because if you over tighten it, you'll strip the threads going into the power supply. So it's in there pretty good. I'm going to make sure that's in the off position. Obviously, I'm not going to plug it in. But the next step would be to get all the cabling. I will take these cables and I will get those in connected. I'm going to go ahead and take the power supply back out, and I'm going to make my connections on the back of the power supply. Then I'm going to reinstall the power supply into the case. That seems to be probably what's going to have to happen, because it's very difficult to get in here to make sure I have the orientations correct. These are keyed, so I want to make sure that this is keyed correctly. See here, right here, this has got a key on it that it can only go in one way. I want to make sure that I get those in properly. So I'm going to take the power supply back out, and then I'm going to put the connections on, or the cabling on, and then I'll reinstall the power supply. Okay, it seems I have all the cables connected, or the power cables connected into the power supply. Wasn't that difficult. Like I said, some of these were marked fairly well. As you can see on the back side of here, it says MB for motherboard. There's actually, this is the motherboard cable, and there's actually two connections, one for the top and one at the bottom. The bottom also shows you motherboard here, and then at the top it says it here. So I just connected those in. There's really only one way, got the tab at the top, so you can remove it or put it back in. Then this section here had 4 positions or sections for peripherals, IDE/SATA. So there was 4 of those cables, and they all fit perfectly into that. Then on the bottom here, beside the motherboard, don't know if you can see that very well, but anyway, on this side over here, it said CPU/PCIe, and there was 4 positions or 4 areas that you can plug in, and they gave you cables for 3, so there's obviously room to grow even more by adding another cable, and I'd have to purchase it if I needed it. I doubt if I'll need it. It wasn't difficult at all. I just wish that I had started off putting these in, and now I'll go ahead and reinstall the power supply into the case. Okay, it's all connected back in. Like I said, I put it back here in this spot. Orientation will be like this when you look at it from the back side when it's sitting upright. The 4 screws went here and here, and like I said, I had to lift it up a bit. You can see that one of the biggest issues with computers is all the cabling. Where are we going to put it all? So we got to obviously route everything. So basically the power supply is right there. Got its own fan. Got that fan for the case. And I did find a second fan. There is a second fan in here. Now I lost track of it. It's back up in here, down in here. So like I said in my component introduction, I thought there was only one fan in here, but there is 2. It's supposed to come with 2. Like I said, there's grates up here for these fans, and I did purchase a set of 4 fans, although I'd only needed 3 if I decide to use 3. But anyway, power supply is now in, and now we'll get ready to go into the next stage. While I had this open at the moment, I went ahead and installed one internal fan. I went ahead and put one in. But I wanted to point out that I did make a mistake on the power supply. When I first installed it, remember you were able to read the Seasonic? It was sitting over here and everything. It looks kind of upside down. The reason why I had to do that was because when I was looking at it, it showed the fan here. Now this particular case, let's talk about coolant first. Airflow. Basically the air flows in from the front, and there is a fan down here that brings intake in, and the idea is the cool air from outside comes in from the front, and then it's exhausted out the back. So this fan will end up blowing outward. That fan will end up blowing outward. And remember, there was a dust collector on the bottom of this. Well, I needed to have the fan of the power supply against that dust collector, so I had to flip it around and put that back on there right, because now it's going to blow it out. Now I did pop this off wanting to put a fan, an additional fan in here. The only problem I have is that the screws that came with my fans were basically short profile. They were really small, and on the front here, if I were to pop this off, I wanted to put a fan in here so I'd have 2 intakes, but the screws weren't long enough. They actually need to be about this long, whereas they were low profile screws for this type of installation. We're up against the flat thing. See here, there's a gap here, so it needed to screw in to these. So I'm gonna have to get me some longer screws, and I was looking in what came with the case, and there was no screws that were that long, and like I said, they were short profile screws that came with the fans themselves. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and close this case up and set aside, bring out the motherboard, and I'm going to install CPU, the fan, and what memory I got. Okay, here I have the motherboard. Like I said, it's an MSI B450 Tomahawk. Anyway, what it came with a couple SATA cables. It came with a 90-degree or straight in connection. Set those aside for now. Came with a shield that'll get attached to back here, but it'll be attached to the case. This is actually a shield, which you don't want to exclude that. You definitely want to put that on there. But the idea right now is I'm going to install the AMD Ryzen processor. It'll go here, and it's a zero insertion force or ZIF socket. So there's in this corner, it shows a triangle, and there's that triangle, so we should be able to match it up together, and it should just drop right in, and then I should be able to just lock her in place. And the other thing I got to note is the fan that came with the processor. Since I'm using these spring-loaded connections, I have to remove these screws around there, so when I go to put that on, then it'll just replace these brackets here, since I'm using this particular style of heat sink, and fan. So it's got these screws on here, so I'll hold on to that, put that on the side. First, I'm going to locate make sure that my orientation is correct on this. And the nice thing of it is, if I don't get it right, it won't go in, and you can't force it. It should just drop automatically with no issues whatsoever. So it should not be an issue at all. So it looks like, from what I can tell, it looks like it should just drop right in here. And it's not wanting to. So I don't have the orientation correct. So I'm going to keep playing until I get the orientation correct. Up there it went. Dropped right in. So now I should be able to just slap her down, lock her in place. So now I'm going to remove these screws. Remove these little brackets here. And then I should be able to put the heatsink fan on. Then following this, I will install the RAM, the memory cards. So these just come out, set it off to the side. But anyway, I should be able to just pop this down here and make sure my orientation is good. Not sure where the fan connection goes. It's fan here, so looks like I got the fan connection right there, and there, that should be a fan connection as well. So I might just go ahead and set that down in there. But what I think I'll do is I will check out the manual. Shows where I had to take those out. And then I want to see, it goes to CPU fan 1. So it says it goes to CPU fan 1. So CPU fan 1, this is system fan 1. This says CPU fan 1. So it's obviously going to connect there. So I'm just going to make it so that it gets to that properly. So I'm just going to put this down on it, and then we'll screw it in. Just make it snug enough. That one, yeah, okay, now it's finally going in. So I'll snug that down a little bit. And I'll come across here. This one's pretty snug yet, but it's getting there. It is now snug. And I'll just make sure everything feels good. Okay. And like I said, now the connection should go right here where it says CPU fan 1. And there should only be one way to put that in there, and it's this way. So I will get that connected. And now that is plugged in, and I'm not sure, what I want to do with that, but for now I'll leave it alone. So there you go. Now, hopefully you're able to see that. I wasn't paying attention on what you could see, but underneath this fan and cooler is a CPU that just dropped right in. It was a 0 insertion force ZIF socket, and then that's labeled CPU fan 1, and that's where that got plugged into. So that's what's going to supply the power for that. So now the next step is I'm going to drop in the memory, and we'll get that ready to go. Okay, we're about to get ready to install the memory. Before we get there, I wanted to note that, hang on, I wanted to note that those brackets that I took out for the fan, because this particular fan came with the processor, but if I were to upgrade my fan at some point, I would want to hold on to these because these would be a bracket that will hold those the new type of fan in, you know, like a liquid cooled or something like that. So it was recommended that you hold on to those. So I just put them in a Ziploc baggie, and then I'll just set that inside the motherboard case box. And but for now, I'm going to hold on to that. So to put these in according to the manual and to Paul's Hardware, which I'll give you a link to him on YouTube. According to Paul's Hardware, as well as the manual, you're going to, since my configuration right now is only using two, these are two 16 gigabyte memory cards for 32 gig. It's recommending, according to that you populate every other slot for your memory starting away from the CPU. So I will install these in like so. Now, one thing to note is you want to make sure that you'll see that there's a slot, and there's a slot on the memory, and then you just pop it in there, and I've already pulled these out. So when I put pressure down into the board, these should just lock right in place. So like I said, you start with every other one, make sure that you got it aligned properly, and if everything works out, those should just lock right in. And they did. So I'm going to go ahead and close the ones that I know that I'm not going to be using. And like I said, it's fairly simple. Just populate the second one, and then I'm going to populate the last one and pop it down, and the lock's engaged. So that's all you got to do for the memory. Okay, looking at the installation for the motherboard, first thing we need to know is we have these standoff screws, well, yeah, standoffs that have to go inside here because you cannot have the motherboard sitting flat on the bottom because it's all metal. You're going to make all kinds of contacts and really mess you up. So it's very important that you have these standoffs. So this is an ATX motherboard, and this case, sometimes they're marked, but this one is not marked, as you can see, or maybe not be able to see. But anyway, there's 9 of them. There's 3 across here. There's 3 across here. And then down at the bottom here, there's 3 more across for the 9. So I'm going to install these standoffs down there. But maybe you can see this, but there's screw holes here. That would be if I was using a micro ATX motherboard. So it would be a lot smaller, but we won't be using those. We'll be using these wider ones and using those standoffs. And what I did prior to that was I identified what screw is needed by making sure that they fit in that properly. So that one fits in that. So that's the type of screw we're going to use. Now these screws came with the case. These are all the different screws that came with it. What's nice about this, as you can see, you can't put that in. I don't know if you can see that or not, but you can't put that in with a Phillips screwdriver. So you either have to use a socket of some sort, because see, it's how it's laid out. So what's cool is they gave you this tool that you just pop over. You just start it in by hand, and you pop this over it. It allows you to do it. Then you can use a standard screwdriver to screw these down. So that's what I'm going to do. Right now I'm going to put these in by hand, and then I'll use that little tool and I'll tighten them all down. Okay, I've got those mounted in there, or at least hand tightened down. Now I'll put this little tool on top of those, and I'll use a standard screwdriver to tighten those up with. Or tighten those down. How's that? So that one's snug. Just go from back one to the other. Okay, they're all down. They're all tightened now. Now before I can mount the motherboard in there, remember this item is an I/O shield for the motherboard and all the connections. It's for you know, your audio and flashback section, HDMI, USB, all that kind of stuff goes in that slot on the back of the power supply, or the case, almost, but it goes in here. See if I can show it to you without removing the camera. But anyway, see that slot back in here, that empty space. It's important that that goes in there. So now you want to do that. You want to install that now, because you won't be able to once you get the motherboard in. The audio section right here, it's got to be facing downward when you're looking at the back of the case if it was standing up. So I'm going to install this. It should just fit in there. It might be a little tight. There it goes. It kind of snaps in. Make sure you got, there's a fan wire in the way here, so I'm going to get this snapped in. I got part of it, not all of it yet. Well, maybe I got it all. Looks like I did. So that snapped in fairly easily, I guess. So anyway, now that's done. So now the next step is to get everything up out of the way. Wanted to note, we're going to kind of note some of the connections. I got to look at the manual and see what everything is, but like these, I think that's your SSD, or the what do they call that? The well, anyway, we'll get into that. I'll tell you what everything is, but got to make sure that you know what's going to go on. You know, like, and they're labeled. You know, there's a system fan 3, there's a fan 4. This is ATX power, so the big, longer cord for the motherboard out of the power supply will fit into there, and there should be another connection for the power supply. This one's called pump fan 1. I don't think that's really much different. I think this is the other motherboard power connection, and we're going to have, at some point here soon, we're going to have to worry about what goes where. But for now, oh, I'm sorry, these connections here are the SATA connections, and like I said, I don't know if you guys saw it or not, but this is the big power, the big block connection from the power supply into the motherboard. This should be the other one, and so now this should just mount in here like this, but I'll get to that in just a second. Okay, now we're ready to put the motherboard in. What I did was I separated out nine of those smaller screws that will actually attach and secure down on top of those standoffs. So in order to put this in, I'm going to have to make sure that we put this in at an angle for these to protrude out through the shield a little bit, and then we should be able to see that these holes will go directly over the standoffs, so I can screw those in. So I'm going to slightly bring that into an angle, look at it from back side, make sure that we're in there properly, and yep, fits right in there perfectly. So great, now I can see that we're sitting on top of these standoffs, and So looks like we're ready to secure it. As long as I got the, yeah, this will work. So I'm going to secure this. I'm going to put this one here first. And then after we're done installing this, then we should be able to start putting down cables in the appropriate, you know, sockets, if you will. You know, the fans, and there's a header, you know, lights and everything else for the top of this case. And this case, like I said, it's got a I think it's where you can plug in speakers and headphones, and there's two or three. There are actually three USB ports on the top of this PC, on the top of the case. Two of them are USB 2.0 and the other one a single 3.0. So we got to make sure that those get connected in properly into the right headers as far as what the cable's got to go into. So I'll go ahead and get those all tightened down. Okay, now that the motherboard is securely fastened in there, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing some connections, and I'm going to start with the fans. Now currently I have 3 fans. There's the one that I installed up here, then there's the system fan that came with the case, and there's one inside the front panel here, and these are the connections for it. Now I want you to note they're all the same. Now this one came with optional, depending on what you're going to use, but we're going to use this one here. Now the pin headers for the fans are 4-prong, and these are 3-prong, but they'll still work because they have, see there's a little, can you see that little bracket there, or that indentation there? On their 4-header pins, they have those guides so you can only put it in the proper way. I don't know if you can see that or not. Let's see. See if that'll focus in. Nope, it won't. Darn it. Anyway, not on an automatic focus. I'd have to manually focus. But anyway, trust me. So there is a connection right here that says system fan, and I'm going to plug that in, making sure that it's oriented right, or some people say orientated right, but I'm going to get that right there, so that fit in there. Now I'll just tuck that up out of the way. The cable, I'll probably tie those off with a zip tie or something. The case actually came with some zip ties. Or I'll just use, you know, like these wraps that came with other things. I'll probably just tie up those. Now there's another header here that says system fan, so I'm going to put the front one there because it's the closest. And like I said, I'm going to make sure that I'm utilizing the 3-prong system, and it fit in perfectly. And then there's another header here that says system fan. So there's other headers in here, so I can still continually add fans. There's plenty of room for fans in this case. So I'm going to get this one in here properly, and it again, all these are 3-prong, and the motherboard come with the 4-prong depending on the type of fan you're using. Now, these are just standard fans. I think they run about 1500 RPM, 1200 RPM, something like that. But anyway, these are all tied off. They're on there now. So I will button these up best I can by tie wrapping them, or using those like bread wrapper ties. And then, you know, just that way they can be tucked away nicely. Alright, I just connected up the front panel indicators, wires. Basically, this motherboard comes with some connections that are not allowed by this case, because this case does not have a reset switch, but it does have a power switch. The front panel has LED plus and minus, so I found the proper location, which was a JFP, JFP1, I believe it was, that, and then it showed you in the diagram in the user's manual. Here, I'll show you the user's manual real quick. It shows where they're connected at, what pins. So the top pins looking inside the case, top pins were 2, 4, 6, and 8. The bottom pins are 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, which is reserved. There is no pin 10. But anyway, this one doesn't have a reset switch, and it doesn't have the hard disk drive LED, you know, showing that it's working. What it did have was the power LED and the power switch, which I had to put on the top, you know, 2, 4 for power LED plus and minus, and then the power switch plus and minus. Basically, the wording faces outwards or inwards, I mean, into the case. So I got those connected, and then I had to figure out where these cables went. This is there's a USB 2 and a USB 3, and I found those by looking inside this manual. Okay, what I'm going to do right now is the big cable here. Some of these are marked, but this is not, but it's very obvious that this particular cable here, it's got the notch up here. This is the power supply cable. This is going to put power into the motherboard, and it's going to go on this header here. This is for the ATX power, ATX meaning the motherboard. And all I got to do is just pop it in there, maybe wiggle a little bit. But once it gets in there, it'll connect, and it won't come out without releasing that tab. So, like that, like so. I wish this fan didn't have this Molex connector. That way, I'm just going to see if I can tuck it up out of the way. Yeah, there we go. I don't think it'll hurt anything sitting on there. We'll find out. I may have to reroute that somewhere. Anyway, I'm just going to replug that back in. And just like I said, just might have to wiggle a little bit until it pops in and snaps like it just did, although I didn't hear it, but it did snap. So that's now connected. And then the next section is for the CPU power. Now for the, as you can probably see, it says CPU on it. Now that will go up here on this header, up here in your view, the upper left. And again, it's got tabs. So I'm just going to try to put both of them in at the same time and get those plugged up. So these are going to supply the power for the motherboard and the CPU. So separate CPU, sometimes I think they call that the supplemental power supply connection. But in this case, we're calling it the CPU, and I didn't get both of them in at the same time, which would have been a lot easier. I'm going to disconnect that and put it back on. Okay, we got the CPU powered up. All right, so now so far I've got the front panels all connected, the fans connected. I got the main power to the motherboard in, and I got the main power for the CPU in. What I'm going to do now, I'm anxious. I probably should have put the video card in, but we're going to hold off on that for a little bit. Okay, for now, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can show the focus down this way a little bit. Hopefully it won't jump around too bad, but I'm going to go to that corner of the motherboard. That's the 3.5 inch bays that's going to hold my hard drives. And one of the hard drives is a solid state device, SSD, and I've already mounted it. See, these pulled out, and this is what it looks like. It's got a plate here. It's plastic, of course, but there's a plate here, and if you'll notice, there's little screws on the side here. Actually, they're not screws at all, but they have screw heads. They're nothing more than prongs that'll hold on to my 3.5 inch mechanical drive. But what I did, as you can see, this was my SSD drive. It's 500 gig, and I'm going to use that as my bootable drive. I'll put the operating system, that kind of stuff on it. As you can see, I've already mounted it, and basically it mounts just like that. I put screws here that mount that in. It's very extremely light. I was really shocked at how light this thing is for being a 500 gig. But again, it's solid state. So both of these, both the mechanical and the SSD, if you can see, I'm going to try to get here so you can see this. So you can see how it gets connected. So if you notice here and here, these are exactly the same because they're SATA driven. The longer section here is for the power, and the smaller section is where the data is going to come in and out. So the same here, this is the long section. That's going to, I'll plug the power into that. Now these cables here from the power supply, that's going to be the power into that. Now what you will notice, and like I said, it might not be easily seen here, but this bracket or this, there's an L shape that goes with the connector itself. So there's only one way you can put it in, and basically I'm just going to plug it in like that. I'm not going to do it right now because I want to get this set up, and I'm going to go in from the back side. And this one, this particular one houses there's 4 connectors for 4 different ones, and there's actually 2 of them. So I have 8 SATA connections at the moment. So, and I see I got a PCIe connector too. I got to figure out where that's got to go yet. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and install this in. I think I'm going to put this in the bottom. So I'm just going to slide it in there. Like I said, it's already mounted, and then just a little push and it clicks in. And then I'm going to take one of these cables, that's the power, and then I'm just going to route it in underneath like this. And I'm going to have 2 of them sitting there, and I'll put the mechanical one right above it, or maybe even 2 slots above it. And then that way I'll be able to connect that, and I'll get that on the back side. Now what I wanted to show you on this one, the 3.5-inch drive, this is my 2 terabyte drive. Like I said, same cabling hookup. But remember those prongs I showed you? Basically, if you gently pull aside, this slides up there, and there's holes in the side of the, screw holes in the side of the drive itself. Those will just snugly go in there and hold on to that. So it's kind of in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put screws and mount it in here, and then I'm going to pop this in here. I think, like I said, I'm going to put it on the top. I'll put it on top. That way I'll have an empty bay in the middle. So what I did was I just mounted screws in here to mount, put screws in there to mount the drive itself into the holder, and I'm just going to slide that in. And like I said, I'm going to leave it at the top, and you just snap it in. And this one's empty right now. I don't have a device for it, so I'm just going to go ahead and just pop it in there. That way we have it. Anyway, like again, like I mentioned, there's 4 of them on here, and I just routed this cable. Of course, you can't see it from that. You can barely see it, but anyway, I'll see if I can get it up there. I routed the cable through here into the bottom. And I'm going to make sure and look at my orientation. There's 4 of these on here, so I should be able to utilize it this way. So I'll probably go this route. I'll use the 2 middle ones, and I'm just going to make the connection. So I'm going to make sure that I get that L shape in properly, and it's oriented it this way. So I'm going to put the first one down here, and I'll make that connection. And I'll just tuck that other piece around. So it's in, and now I'll take this one and I'm going to connect it into this one, and I'll just leave this upper one wide open. I can just tuck it up inside here. It doesn't really matter. So I could go anywhere, do anything. I could probably tuck it in there if I wanted to. I don't think that's a good idea. But anyway, I'll just do that, and somehow I'll It looks like it'll tuck away just fine. So I've got this going here. That way it's nice, that way it's not coming in and back up and under. So anyway, those are the connectors for the power. And I'm going to open up this SATA cables. And like I said, I'm not sure if I'm going to have to use this is the straight one. See how it's straight? Straight up and down. So there is no wrong way to connect, meaning doesn't matter which end, they're both the same. So again, excuse me, again we have that L shape, so I gotta make sure, and it looks like it's going to go in this way. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this one in here, and it's got this tab, so if I need to remove it, I just push that tab in and it'll pull out easier. So it should snap in there. I'll connect up the SSD drive, and wow, you didn't hear that. I barely felt it, but anyway, it is now in, and I'm going to go ahead and route this through the same spot that I routed the power in, and all I need to do is find the SATA connection on the motherboard. So while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and connect this one and feed it through here too, and then I may have to reverse it depending if I can be able to use a straight or if I'm going to have to use the angle one. So the next shop that I'll give you is I will show you where the connections go for SATA cables on the motherboard. Okay, I turned the case around so you could get a good camera angle. These are the two connectors that came off of those. So I'm just going to bring this one around back through here. And right here are two blocks for SATA connections. And that's two blocks, but there's one per, or two per, so that means I actually have 4 connections there. And that's not all there is. There's more down here. It looks like I have at least 6 just right in this area. There's 4 here, and there's 2 separate ones down here. But I'm not going to mess with those. These are the closest ones, and I'm not going to I'm going to separate them. I'm going to use one directly. I'm thinking I'm going to probably go ahead and route this back through here, and I will make sure I get my tab correct. And looks like I got it. I'm not sure yet. Yeah, that makes sense that I do it that way. So I'm going to see if it just fits in there snug. Yep, got it in there. You probably heard that click. And the straight in seemed to work just fine. So now I've got those two connected. They're basically the same cable as far as functionality, but they're slightly physically different. One was a little bit shorter and one's a little bit fatter. But now I got the 2 drives connected. I got power to them, and I got the information or the I/O part. So anyway, got that in there, and that's all ready to go. Okay, we got all those connections in, and I'm going to get ready. I'm going to install that graphics card in now. I'm going to use, there's 2 PCI expansion slots here. Always use by default the one closest to the CPU. In this case, the one up here, the top one, which is closest to the CPU. Now I've got the card, and what I need to do is, because it's got the connections that come out of the back of the case, I'm going to kind of just mock set this in here. I'm not going to connect anything, just to see where it lines up. And then I'm going to make note of, because I have to have the connections, I'm going to screw it down. I need to see what needs to be removed from the case, so I know which ones they are. So I'm going to set that aside for right now, and I'm going to turn this case. Now this case is a cheaper case. Had it been more expensive, I would have had, these all would have been in by screws through here. But this one's a cheap one, which I have no problem with. You just got to remove, in this case I have to remove these 2 slots, and then when I put that in there, that'll occupy that space. So these 2 are the 2 that need to be removed. So you just wiggle it out, and in this case, so I think I'll do it by hand. So it'll snap off. Now I'm going to pull out the second one. It takes up two spots or 2 slots. So we'll remove that one. So then there we go. Okay, we got those out. All right, so I'm going to turn the case back around. All right, so I'm going to pull all these connections out. These are for all the different connections for, you know, you got your HDMI. There's all different types of things. A couple, looks like 3 HDMI type ports and USB probably. And I don't know what this one is. This is a brand new one. But anyway, also got the guard on here. And I'm going to take this plastic off. I don't need to have that in there. So take that off. Remove all that. Looks like a little bit of it tore off, so make sure to get it all. Set that aside so I can throw it away later. And I think that's it as far as all that goes. So what I'm going to do, should be able to, these will pop in and it should snap in, and there's only one way. Now the thing that I had to make sure when I bought this case was that it had the room, because this is a longer card. I had to make sure I had room for it. So I'm going to go ahead and pop it in, and then I'll go find me the screws that I need to get that supported in there. Okay, it's in, and I don't like the way it feels, so I got to have those screws there. So I'm going to go ahead and lay this down, and I'm going to find those screws, because otherwise it's too heavy and it'll break my motherboard. All right, now that we got this in, it's in there. It's pretty secure. It's not, there's no weight issue, because these 2 screws are now going to hold that in for us just fine. So now what I need to do is connect the PCI power. Now in this case, you can see that I want to use that one. Let me see if I need to move this camera over here so you can see it. And bring the case a little bit. All right, we got this one, which is 8 slot or connector, and then we have 6. Now these come. This one says PCIe, which, you know, for the PCI expansion, for whatever PCI device we put in there. Now I'll use this and put it together, and that the first one will go in, and there's only one way to do it, and I was going about to do it wrong. So let me get this one back together. All right, so we're going to use all 8 of those. It's going to go into this one, and it should just snap in. It's in. Now I use the one branching off this. Now in this case, I don't need this 2-pin one. I only need the single one. So I will plug that puppy in, and that one actually, you could hear the snap. Now, if I were able to power up yet, which I'm not able to yet, now that should work. Now, interestingly enough, you heard me talk about RGB. This particular graphics card is RGB, is my understanding. I think it would just naturally came that way, so when I do fire it up, I think it's going to all light up and all that fun stuff. As far as I know, that's the only device I got that would be RGB, so we should be good to go. At the moment, outside of having these nicely tucked and everything, which I may or may not be too concerned by, some people are. I'm not that anal, I guess. So as long as you know, they're tucked away and nice, everything's looking good so far. Motherboard's in. I'm excited about this, guys, and hopefully something here help you if you ever decide you want to do this. And of course, if you know me personally, you know that I always help or give advice, whatever I can do. Alright, I did add another fan in here. Got it plugged in. It's got power coming to it or getting ready to. So now all I got to do is I'm going to turn on the power supply, and then I should be able to hit this power button. And hopefully we won't see any smoke. Okay, now hopefully we won't have any issues. I'm going to turn the power supply on now. Okay, there's power coming to the power supply. Now I'm going to turn on the main power button, and hopefully no smoke. We should start seeing fans running, etc. Look at that. See, that's got the RGB. See how it is kind of cool, but not needed. Okay, fans are running. Top fan, back fan. Obviously the power supply. These two fans down here, I can feel the heat or the coolness coming in. Everything's working fine. So, pretty cool. That's kind of wild, but that's the only RGB I've got in the system. Let's see if I shut off these lights. Might be able to see it a lot better. Not too bad, not too shabby. So, alright, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to transfer this computer. I'm going to shut it down. Alright, I'm going to transfer the computer over to another table next to my other computer and set up the monitor and the keyboard and mouse onto it, and then I'm going to install the system. I'm going to put Windows 10 on it. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited. It all fired up just fine with no problems. No smoke, not smelling anything. Everything's good.